6 of the fantasy football season, and here's wide receivers sit starts every matchup this week. So the first matchup of the week's Thursday Night Football, the Washington Commanders at the Chicago Bears. So right here, this week at the wide receiver position, Terry McLaurin, I'm going to have him as a start, even though he hasn't been doing much of late here this season is Terry McLaurin, but he's still a guy with a good matchup versus the Chicago Bears. Still the number one wide receiver over there for this Washington Commander team. And after a mediocre ball game, 5 catches, 76 yards. I think here versus this Bears secondary, he could have a good ball game. And the guy is a number 2-3 receiver in your league. You could do worse ones. So I got Terry McLaurin to start. Naomi Brown, we know he had a good ball game in week 5 with 2 deep balls for 2 catches, 105 yards, and 2 touchdowns. But he's a guy, maybe in deeper leagues, you take a shot with him. But this week here, I'm going to have him as a sit. Only one game he had a big ball game, and a guy can't handle it. Jahan Dotson, if he does play, I'll have him as a borderline start. But right now, he's been banged up with a hamstring injury, and the reports where he's going to be out a week or 2. Now to the Bears side of things, Darnell Mooney. I just can't trust Darnell Mooney. I know the last couple weeks here, he's actually showing some flashes, but could you really trust anyone in this Bear offense? The last 2 weeks for Mooney, he's improved. Week 4 at the Giants, 13.40 fantasy points. And then week 5 in Minnesota, 2 catches, 52 yards. But obviously, you're not going to trust that for your fantasy team. And right here this week, it's just guys I can't trust on Chicago. So I'm going to sit him and Aquarius Brown, who's getting some work at wide receiver, is a sit as well. The next game, the Minnesota Vikings and the Miami Dolphins. So right here to start for me with Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen. Jefferson, obviously, you're going to start him each and every week. He's one of the best receivers, if not the best receiver in fantasy football. And Adam Thielen, I know he's been up and down so far this season here, but he's a player that could go out there any Sunday and put up some fantasy points. I know he had a dud performance in week 5 here versus the Bears, but right here, week 6 of Miami, I think he does damage in this game as Thielen. And he's a wide receiver I would start. And KJ Osborne, I'm not going to play. Now to the Miami side of things, I know it's probably going to be Skylar Thompson and Teddy Bridgewater at quarterback once again this week here. But it's hard to imagine to sit Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. So this week here, Tyreek Hill will have as a start. And Jalen Waddle, I know the last couple games here, it hasn't been great ball games for him. I'm going to have him as a borderline play this week for Jalen Waddle. It's not that Jalen Waddle's not good, just the last 2 weeks here, he's failed to reach 6 fantasy points in the last 2 weeks. I got Hill to start and Waddle a borderline play this week. Now the New England Patriots at the Cleveland Browns. So right now for the Patriots, Jacoby Myers, I'll give him the start this week. Devontae Parker, he had one blow-up game over 150 yards, but he's not going to be consistent with Zappe at quarterback. So I'm going to have him as a sit this week here for this New England team. And also Nelson Aguilar, he's just a guy that'll have a pop game here and there, but he's not a player I'm going to start on my fantasy team. So this week here, Nelson Aguilar is a sit as well, and he's been banged up as well over the last few weeks, only getting 1 target in the week 5 game. So Aguilar is a sit, Jacoby Myers is a start, and Devontae Parker a sit as well. So now to the Brown side of things, Amari Cooper, up and down season so far. A couple good games, couple bad games, or mediocre games here for Cooper. But he's a guy that's the number 1 target over here in Cleveland. And this week here, someone's going to have to catch the football over there. So as a third receiver or flex option, I got Cooper as a start. And People Jones, he's not done nothing this season. I know he's the number 2 wide receiver there, but it's not much to talk about him. So People Jones is a bench this week. Now to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Pittsburgh Steelers. On the Bucs side, Mike Evans, he's been mediocre so far this season. He had 1 monster game, but versus Steelers secondary, we just saw Gabe Davis tear him up. And Mike Evans is a similar type of receiver, so I'll give Evans the start. Chris Godwin, he looked good in this ball game in week 5, getting a lot of catches, a lot of fast routes. I have him as a start as well. Russell Gage, he's the 3rd receiver, it looks like, but I'm not going to count on Russell Gage as a guy to play this week. So he's a sit. And Julio Jones, even if he comes back in this one, expect much from him. So I got him as a sit. Now to the Steelers side of things, Deontay Johnson, I got as a start this week here, even though his numbers have been underwhelming so far with Pickett, a quarterback. But like I say, they're going to have to throw the football a lot, is the Steelers team. So as a number 2 wide receiver or flex option, I think Deontay Johnson is still safe. Chase Claypool, he's done nothing pretty much for the Steelers team all season. And he's a guy I mentioned weeks ago as a drop on the drop list. And like I said, he's not going to do nothing. I know week 5 at Buffalo, a decent ball game, 5 catches, 50 yards. But Claypool, he's not fantasy relevant right now. And I got him as a sit. And now George Pickens, a lot of hype coming into the season about Pickens. And so far with Kenny Pickett at quarterback, 2 solid ball games. Week 4 versus the Jets, 6 catches, 102 yards. And Week 5 at Buffalo, 6 catches, 83 yards on 8 targets. So right here versus Tampa Bay, I think Johnson and Pickens are going to get most of the targets here from Kenny Pickett. Now I got both these guys as a start this week with Claypool a bench. Now on to the next game, San Francisco 49ers and the Atlanta Falcons. So right here, Deebo Samuel, obviously he's locked in as a top 10, top 15 wide receiver each and every week. I know he had an off game in the Week 5 ball game with only 11.20 fantasy points, but he'll get it back going. Atlanta gives up the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. So I got Deebo as a start and Brandon Ayuk a borderline play this week with the bye weeks in effect and some injuries this week here. Brandon Ayuk, he's a guy that's borderline for me at best. He had 3 catches, 58 yards in the Week 5 ball game at the Carolina Panthers. But at least over the last few weeks here, he's had 7 or more fantasy points 4 weeks in a row. So if you want to start him in a decent matchup, I'm going to put him borderline. Now to the Atlanta Falcon things. Drake London, if he's going to play in this ball game, he's banged up with a knee issue. I'm going to have him as a start. Someone's got to catch the football over there for this Atlanta Falcon team. And I know it was a quiet ball game, 4 catches, 35 yards. But right here, like I said, if they're trailing early and often, they got to throw the ball down the field. And in some garbage time, I think he's going to be a start. And no one else is really fantasy relevant at the wide receiver position over there in Atlanta. I know Hodge, he's made a couple plays into carriers, but right now those guys aren't even on the fantasy radar, so I left them off the list this week. Now, next game's the Cincinnati Bengals and the New Orleans Saints. So right here, the Bengals, this week I'm going to start Jamar Chase, obviously. I know it hasn't been a great season here for Jamar Chase, but he's still a guy that could break out anytime. And he's not been totally horrible. At least he's had double-digit fantasy points the last 3 weeks in a row. And T. Higgins, if he plays in this ball game, I'm going to start him as well. He's banged up with a little bit of a knee and ankle issue, is T. Higgins here going into this Week 6 ball game. And Tyler Boyd, I will start him if Higgins is out in this game. But right now, if they both play Chase and Higgins, I will sit Boyd, because his only big ball game was versus the New York Jets, where he went for 4 catches, 105 yards and a touchdown. So right here on the Bengals side, Chase and Higgins you start. Boyd I'd sit unless Higgins is out. And now to the New Orleans Saints, Michael Thomas, if he plays in this game, even though I think Michael Thomas is mailing in now. He played a few games. Jameis Winston went down. Andy Dalton's coming in. And Thomas made his few appearances for the season. So it wouldn't be surprising to me if Thomas's injury lingers for a while here. But if he plays in this ball game, I'm going to play. And Chris Olave, he's been doing great and one of the better rookie wide receivers so far this season, but he left the ball game with a potential concussion in Week 5. So right now, if he plays as well as Olave, he's definitely a wide receiver I'm going to start, because this is a game where I think the Saints are going to be chasing points and they're going to have to get their playmakers involved. And Jarvis Landry, he was out as well in the Week 5 ball game, but even if Landry plays, I think his best years are behind him. Yeah, he could have a couple good games here and there as Landry, but he's really hasn't been the same in the last 2 or 3 seasons, so I can't trust him this week. And I got him as a sit. The next ball game, the New York Giants at home taking on the Baltimore Ravens coming to town. So for the Ravens, if Rashad Bateman does play in this game after missing Week 5 with a foot injury in that one versus the Cincinnati Bengals, he's a guy that would start. I know this Giant team's been playing good, but their secondary is still leaky and beatable in my opinion. And Devin Duvernay, we know he's been a decent number 2 wide receiver so far this season with a few good ball games here and there for this Baltimore Raven team, but he's still a guy in 2 wide receiver leagues, or even as a flex option I wouldn't count on each and every week. And this Giant defense, believe it or not, gives up the least amount of fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. Now going to the Giant side of things, I know Slayton had a good ball game with 70 yards receiving, and he was the number 1 option versus the Packers in London in Week 5. But yeah, I could go out there and pick him up as an option to stash on my bench, but not as a guy that I'm going to go out there and start unless you're in total desperation and need a wide receiver option. Kadarius Toney, he's still banged up with his injury. The coaching staff obviously doesn't like him, and the rookie Robinson is well still banged up and not ready to go. So right now, Slayton, I still will sit him. And Richie James Jr., a few weeks ago, he had a couple decent ball games with 8-10 fantasy point PPR games in that range, but the last 2 weeks he's pretty much done nothing, and he's not a guy on the radar, so he's a sit. The next game, the Green Bay Packers host the New York Jets here. So the Jets here, their offense this season, they've had some playmakers and guys who could go out there and make plays. I know Garrett Wilson the last few games hasn't really connected with Zach Wilson, but I still would put him in the starting lineup here this week for fantasy owners as a flex option or a third receiver in 3 receiver leagues. Elijah Moore, he just hasn't connected at all this season. If it was with Joe Flacco or obviously now with Zach Wilson, he just hasn't gone out there and made plays. The last couple games here, just nothing of substance. And I mentioned him as a drop in last week. So at wide receiver was Elijah Moore, and he came up even empty in week 5 where the Jets scored 40 points with 1 catch for 11 yards, so you can't trust him. And he shouldn't even be a player on your team. And Corey Davis I have as a borderline start this week. Every other week it seems like Davis has a big ball game. We saw the big ball game in week 4, and then week 5 he didn't pretty much do anything. It was the Jets running backs more than anything in this ball game. Davis in this one only 2 catches, 38 yards for the Jets versus Miami. So right here he's borderline. And out to the Packers side of things, Romeo Doubs. I know he had the off game versus the Giants, but I think he comes back with a vengeance in this one. And he's a guy Aaron Rodgers, believe it or not, does trust, even though we've seen some fumble issue and some drop balls. But Romeo Doubs, I still have faith in him as a number 2 or flex option this week at wide receiver. And I think they could beat this Jets secondary. And Allen Lazard, he's becoming pretty decent now with Aaron Rodgers. As long as he's healthy, he's a guy you pretty much start each and every week in a 3 receiver league, whereas a flex option with the touchdown in London and then that batted ball. The last play of the game was going to Lazard, but obviously it didn't get there. So right now, Rodgers trusts Lazard and Romeo Doubs, and for most weeks, I'm going to say these guys are starts, especially with the bye weeks coming up. And Randall Cobb, I have him as a borderline guy. The last few weeks, he's been ramping up and getting more snaps. And obviously, he's all reliable for Aaron Rodgers as Randall Cobb, a guy he's relied on for many seasons. Then he left a few off seasons ago, but now he's back, Randall Cobb, and he had a solid ball game with 7 catches, 99 yards on 13 targets. I think Cobb in this ball game, he can make some plays versus this Jets secondary. And if you're in a pinch as a borderline option, I think he's decent this week. The next game, Jacksonville Jaguars at the Indianapolis Colts. So right here, Christian Kirk's a start. I know Kirk had the worst game of his Jaguar career in week 6, but right now versus an Indianapolis Colts team that in week 2, Christian Kirk, he put up big numbers in that ball game. And once again, I think he could have a good one versus this Colts team. And that one, 6 catches, 78 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I don't know if it's going to be a game to that extent, but after coming off of 2 bad games for Christian Kirk here, I think he bounces back in this one. And I'll fire him up as a start and a guy to have confidence in as a number 2 wide receiver on your roster. Marvin Jones, I know he came off 7-catch, 106-yard game. But the week before that, he had a goose egg, and he's been hot and cold for this Jaguar team. And he's a guy I just can't trust. He's been too Jekyll and Hyde. And the same with Zay Jones. A few decent games early in the season. Then he missed week 4 with an injury. And then week 5, he didn't do anything with 4.5 fantasy points. So right here, I would sit Zay Jones. Now to the Colts side of things, Michael Pittman, he's definitely been a bust and a disappointment so far here for this Colts team. And obviously fantasy owners. But right now, I'm going to throw him out there one more week as a guy to start on your fantasy roster. And week 5 at Denver was a tough matchup. They gave up the second least amount of fantasy points to receivers on the year. He had 5 catches, 59 yards, but I'm going to have him as a start with the bye starting. But if he don't deliver this week, he's a guy that'll sit. And his teammate Alec Pierce, one of the bigger waiver wire pickups this week here, receiver. Decent ball game last week in PPR leagues with 8 catches, 81 yards. In week 4, even going back to 4 catches, 80 yards. So right here, week 6 versus Jacksonville, he's another borderline play. If you're in deeper leagues or 3 receiver leagues, I think you could get away with Pierce being a viable option. So this week, I got him borderline. Next game, Arizona Cardinals at the Seattle Seahawks. So Hollywood Brown, you fire him up each and every week. He's the number 1 target over there in Arizona, and a guy you could count on for number 1 wide receiver numbers pretty much every week. Rondale Moore and AJ Green, they pretty much haven't shown much for this Arizona Cardinal team. And Kyler Murray, he pretty much just targets, like I said, Hollywood Brown, and Zach Ertz in the passing game here. I know Dortch, he was decent for the first 3 weeks of the season, but he's totally not in the offense. And AJ Green, he came back in this ball game in week 5, but only 3 catches for 20 yards. So once D-Hop comes back, Moore and Green definitely won't have value or be on these lists. Now to the Seattle side of things, DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett have been that dangerous 1-2 combo like we expected them to be the last few seasons, but it just hasn't come to fruition. But Geno Smith, they've unleashed him here, is Pete Carroll and his coaching staff, and he's paying big dividends in a high-powered offense right now is Geno with these guys. So DK Metcalf, he's been a monster once again this season, and Lockett's been that nice deep ball threat, and both these guys are pretty much locks his starts until further notice. Right now, the next game, Carolina Panthers at the Chargers. So Baker Mayfield, he's out a few weeks with a high ankle sprain, and he wasn't doing anything anyway for his wide receivers. I know Robbie Anderson had a good week 1, but besides that, he hasn't done anything else. But even with P.J. Walker now in at quarterback this week, the former XFL player, you can't count on these guys. Moore's done nothing all season. Robbie Anderson, the one ball game, like I said here, they could surprise people, but you're not going to go into a week 6 matchup after what you've seen from these guys the first 5 weeks and have any confidence starting them. So Moore and Anderson both sits for me. Now Cooper Kupp, we know he's the best receiver in the league, puts up numbers week in and week out, and he's a starter. Now to his teammate Allen Robinson, I mentioned him early in the week in receivers to drop, as a wide receiver to drop. His best game is 15 fantasy points this season, and the rest of the game's 4 points or less in PPR leagues, and that's not acceptable. It's week 6 here, and he's a guy phased out of the offense right now. Matthew Stafford struggling. If it's not Cooper Kupp or Tyler Higbee, he's looking no one else's way pretty much. And this offensive line don't give him much time as well, and they're definitely missing Beckham there, believe it or not, in Los Angeles. So Robinson an easy sit this week. The next game, Buffalo Bills and the Chiefs. This game's going to be the game of the week here, in my opinion. AFC Championship rematch after we saw that crazy ball game last season. So Stephon Diggs, obviously he's a fired up wide receiver each and every week. You put him in your lineup. And Gabe Davis finally having his monster breakout game this season. And we know Gabe Davis last season, 4 touchdowns in the AFC Championship with over 150 yards versus St. Chief team. So Davis, obviously, he knows what to do versus secondary. And we saw Devontae Adams beat them on a few deep balls as well on Monday Night Football in Week 5. So the Gabe Davis could be that deep threat once again like he was in Week 5 was Davis, torching that Pittsburgh Steelers defense with a 98-yard touchdown and a 62-yard touchdown. So right now he's healthy, he looks like, after an ankle injury. Limited him the last couple weeks here. Week 5, he came back with the monster ball game. Isaiah McKenzie, we don't know if he's going to play in this game, but one way or another, if he does, he's a borderline start for me. And now all the Chief main receivers are borderline starts for me. I know Valdez-Scantling the last couple weeks here has been playing better football. 6 catches, 90 yards on Monday Night Football with a good ball game. But Juju Smith-Schuster, a lot of hype for him coming into the season, but he really hasn't done much, especially with the last couple weeks here. Week 4, Tampa, 5 catches, 46 yards. In Week 5 versus Vegas, he didn't show up in that one. 3 catches, 33 yards. Yes, he had the targets and all that, but these guys are hard to trust this week. And McCole Hardman, another guy, a lot of high hopes for him coming into the season, but he's pretty much been a non-factor, even though he had a decent ball game in Week 5 with 4 catches, 73 yards, and a rush for 7 yards. But I still can't trust these Chief receivers. Too Jekyll and Hyde, some good games and some games where they don't show up. So this week here, they're all borderline starts. If you want to start them in a deeper league or whatever, that's fine. Or you got injuries and a lot of bye weeks. But I'm not expecting huge weeks. It's going to be the Travis Kelce show once again, especially after coming off a 4-touchdown game. He's pretty much unguardable and unstoppable. Next game, Sunday Night Football, Dallas Cowboys at the Philadelphia Eagles. So CeeDee Lamb not having the greatest of seasons, but he's still a serviceable wide receiver. Some weeks he's going to have great weeks with Cooper Rush, your quarterback, and then some weeks he's going to have a little bit of a down week. Is CeeDee Lamb, like we saw from him in Week 5, where this Cowboy team was built on running the football in that ball game. And obviously defense with Lamb, only 5 catches, 53 yards. And Michael Gallup, so far, he don't look 100% for me. He's still working his way back in for this Cowboy team. I know he had a touchdown a couple weeks ago in his return versus the Commanders. But in the second game versus the Rams, a mediocre game, 4 catches, 44 yards. So this week here versus a tough Eagle defense, I would have him as a sit. And now to the Eagle side of things, A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, they're pretty much matchup proof, these guys. This offense is a well-oiled machine. These guys are putting up numbers, even though we know Brown's coming off a 6.20 PPR day here. I think he's going to bounce back. I think he can make a few plays versus Cowboys secondary. And I know this Cowboy defense is good, but wide receivers have still had some good ball games versus them this season. And both these guys are dynamic wide receivers and playmakers for this Eagle team. And I would start them both. And now the final game of Week 6 here. The Denver Broncos go to the Los Angeles Chargers on Monday Night Football in an AFC West division matchup. So Cortland Sutton, he's been the main target and a solid fantasy option this season here for Russell Wilson, where he puts up double-digit 15-plus fantasy games pretty much each and every week. So he's a start. And Jerry Jeudy, I got him as a borderline guy because Jeudy, he really hasn't done anything really except Week 1, that big ball game with 23 fantasy points. And Week 4, a pretty decent game, 4 catches, 53 yards, and a touchdown. But the last few weeks here, it's just pretty much 3-4 catches, 50, 60 yards at most has been the ceiling here for Jeudy. So this week here, even I know with the bye weeks and a couple injuries at wide receiver, he's a guy I just have as a borderline option. Now to the Chargers side of things, if Keenan Allen comes back in this ball game, obviously he's a definite start and one of the better wide receivers in the league. But to me, it doesn't seem like Keenan Allen's coming back anytime soon with this hamstring injury. That's obviously an injury that lingers and could definitely is a bad injury for wide receivers. We've seen it the last 3 seasons plague Julio Jones, where it possibly could end his career because he just keeps re-aggravating it and can't stay healthy. Mike Williams, he's been filling in great as the number 1 guy here with Keenan Allen out, and he's pretty much a wide receiver you would start each and every week anyway is Mike Williams. He's a dynamic player. He's a big deep ball threat in this offense. And Justin Herbert, obviously, trust him, and he's coming off a huge game in Week 5 with 10 catches, 134 yards. So you fire him up each and every week. And Jordan Palmer even filling in for Keenan Allen. He had a few good ball games the first 3 weeks of the season, but the last 2 weeks here, Jordan Palmer's been non-existent, and he's a guy you can't count on here. He'll have a few games, no doubt, but then he's going to have games where he don't show up like he has the last 2 weeks. So right now, I don't have confidence in him, and he's a sit. So that's your Week 6 wide receiver starts and sits of every matchup for the week fantasy football season.